Ron was interested in the Marine Corps probably in '66. He went and did some interviewing and took their flight tests
Yeah.
because he knew he was going to be drafted. And it wasn't that he didn't have other options, as I was happy to point out to him. He could have gone and worked in engineering for a defense firm. He could have
That would have gotten him a deferment.
Right. He could have gone to seminary and gotten a deferment. But he was a patriot, and he was interested in the training that was afforded for flight training, and so
Yeah.
I knew if he qualified, he would take that opportunity.
Now you mentioned that you reminded him of
That he had
deferment
alternatives.
possibilities. Were you hoping that he would take those?
I would have
One of
been
those?
happy if he had taken advantage of those, but I respected the fact that he felt that he could make a contribution, and we were very young
Sure.
and idealistic, and I think his idea of being a patriot was to do his share, to do his part.
Yeah. So it sounds like you didn't really try to talk him into it, but
I didn't try to talk him out of it either. I
Right.
realized that it was his decision to make, even though it was going to have a huge impact on
yeah.
on us.
Now, when you say it was going to have a huge impact, is that because, of course, being in the military means you're likely to move around, and it means in some ways, you give up control of a lot of your life. Is that what you mainly mean by having a big impact, or did you know from the outset that this likely will also involve service in Vietnam?
We knew it would involve Vietnam.
Yeah.
That was inevitable. If you were going to be a pilot, you were going to go to Vietnam.
Yeah. Do you remember, of course it's a long time ago, but
It is.
do you remember specifically Vietnam being part of the conversation?
Absolutely, because if
Yeah.
it was just the military, that would have been a no-brainer. I mean,
Yeah.
that would have been just another step in the process of training.
Yeah. Yeah.
But knowing that it would lead to war made it a different discussion.
I bet.
Yeah,
Did that make you have any second thoughts at all about the relationship?
absolutely not. We marry the week after graduation, and instead of taking a honeymoon, we fly directly to Pensacola, where he returns to his flight training the following day. When we married, he had been selected for helicopter training.
Right. Okay.
In that process, you get selected for various types of aircraft. So he was in the class that was going to do the helicopter work.
Right.
And we knew when that was finished, he would be sent to Vietnam.
So it sounds like Vietnam was part of the relationship
From the beginning,
from the
almost.
beginning. And this is jumping ahead a little bit, but in some way has Vietnam been a part of the relationship ever since?
You know, I think it has been, Preston, because you would never want to go back and repeat that kind of experience. It was not fun.
Right.
But I think it forged a level of communication that we benefit from today,
Sure.
because there were daily letters, and after you wrote about the weather and how everybody was, that would be a pretty short note.
Yeah.
And so you began to express things that were at a deeper level, and I think it set the stage for an understanding that we might not have forged otherwise.
Vietnam is always an idea, and it's always, we know it's coming, but as the actual day comes when Ron says goodbye, here I go. Do you recall how that affected you? I mean, there must have been a feeling of heaviness or
Oh,
something like that.
I can remember dropping him at the airport and having to pull over multiple times on the drive home just because I couldn't see through the tears.
Wow,
It was difficult
how bad.
because I'm kind of a pragmatic person, and I knew that there was a chance I would never see him again.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that goodbye at that moment must have been one of the, if you think about sort of the list of heavy moments in your life, I imagine
Absolutely.
that's, yeah.
One of the toughest. And I took him to the airport by myself because I didn't want to share the goodbye. So I had no one to blame when I had to pull over because it was kind of my burden to bear.
Not bad.
And it wasn't that we weren't prepared for it. I think we were.
Yeah.
But it was just difficult.
Yeah. As that day got closer, did you have any interest in paying more attention to what was going on in Vietnam, or?
I've thought about that question in terms of my own understanding of the war. And I have to confess that I was interested in it because of Ron's involvement, but I had so many other things that took my attention that I probably didn't pay as much attention to the details. I knew a little, but I didn't study it. I didn't know a lot. Our first child was born before Ron left. So
That's a daughter?
a daughter.
But she wasn't with you at the goodbye?
No, she was just a tiny baby.
You didn't want any distractions?
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
But she was, as I look back on it, I could have made another decision about having a child before Ron left, given the realities. But that was somehow important to have a family together before he deployed.
Having a child, with the possibility, of that Ron wouldn't come back, and of course 58,000, more than 58,000 didn't come
Right.
back. And the possibility of Ron not coming back, was there at least a little comfort in the idea that in your daughter you had something of Ron there?
Absolutely. And one of the memories that lives on in my mind was when we were in the final aspects of his flight training, living in California, in Santa Ana, where he was doing the last stages of his helicopter training.
Yeah.
We were living in an apartment complex, and one day we came home from shopping, and there was a black government car at the curb, and neither one of us thought anything about it, but we put our things down on the kitchen table, and we heard this heart-wrenching scream from the apartment beside us.
Oh, man.
And nobody had to tell us what it meant. And I can remember at that moment thinking, I am not staying here in California while Ron is gone. I'm going home, because if that black car ever pulls up to my curb, I want to be with people that love me.
Wow.
So I went back to Philadelphia, where my parents lived, with Jody, and we stayed there the year that Ron was deployed.
So the car had come to pass the message to a wife.
Two young nurses that lived together in that apartment. One of them had lost her husband.
And so that was the moment you decided, I'm not going through this alone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm
so
going
you go
home.
back with your family.
Yeah.
What memories do you have of that first 24 hours after Ron was home? Was it almost like, we don't want to talk about, let's just kind of pretend for 24 hours that this didn't happen, or?
I think there was kind of a numbness.
Yeah,
And of course, it's easy to forget that we didn't have the kind of communication that we have
Sure.
today.
yeah,
He flew west, and the last contact we had was when I think it was in Seattle before he actually got on the plane that took him
to Vietnam.
overseas.
Yeah. Just, I'm thinking again of this nurse who got the message. Did you ever talk with her, or?
Not
Right.
not very much.
No.
We were just neighbors. We weren't friends,
Sure.
and she was immediately caught up in
Sure.
the reality of her new situation.
You saw that process of
Right.
people coming and going, and
Yes.
everything
Yes.
that goes into that. To what extent did that memory stick with you through the whole Vietnam experience?
It still brings tears when I think about it today.
Over the next, couple weeks, you have a young daughter to take care of. How old was she at the
She
time?
was 3 months when Ron
okay.
left.
So you've got a lot
Mhm.
to keep you busy with a very young child and a family. What was your way of dealing with the situation over the next few weeks,
I
so far as you recall?
leaned heavily on my friends who were there in the area. My parents were wonderful. They helped with the baby,
Yeah.
and I got a little job in retail just to have something to do.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we kind of settled in
Yeah. And did you begin writing letters immediately?
immediately.
Right.
Sometimes they took a while to get to Ron, and there was
Right.
often a lag in his coming my way as well. But
Mhm.
letters were what we had.
Sure.
There were no cell phones, and
Right.
um,
Yeah. And I imagine on his end, it probably took a few weeks for the letters to begin arriving, because
Absolutely.
he's moving around. and-
right. And then sometimes I'd get a bunch of them together, and that would be a real treat.
Mhm. You mentioned that, the war for you was never paid a lot of attention to the politics and things like that. Sometimes folks say that they paid close attention to the news because they wanted to see if they can
Mhm.
glean useful information. In other cases, they didn't really pay much attention. How about for you?
I didn't pay close attention. I couldn't avoid the headlines, but I didn't want to be flooded by it. I think
Mhm.
there was only so much you could handle.
Sure,
Um,
yeah. And in Ron's letters, did he tell you much about really what was going on? Of course, I mean, there's a lot of things you can't talk about because it might be secret or things
Right.
like that, but did he, did he not tell you about kind of missions and things, or?
He did
and
share his
some
missions,
things?
in the same way that I shared my day. He shared his day,
Mm,
but but we talked mostly about the future and what our goals and dreams were, and
mm.
things like that.
Do you recall sort of also trying to glean information from the letters about how this experience might be changing him?
I certainly was aware that he was working hard and facing challenges on a daily basis,
Mm.
and I knew that that would have an impact on him. Just the reality of that
Sure.
environment.
Did you find yourself sort of wondering about that? When I see Ron, of course he'll be Ron, but I
But he'll be a
wonder-
better Ron,
He'll be a better Ron. That was-
because
Yeah.
he's met this challenge.
Mm.
Um, and-
Tried
and-
by fire in a literal.
right,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, in a literal way.
And indeed he was. I believe he was.
How would you say the war changed him, or it sounds like in your sense is that in some ways it strengthened him. So
I think it did strengthen him, and I think it gave him a sense of purpose, that he had new skills that he could use, that he was using for his country, but that they were skills that God was going to use for the kingdom if he had the opportunity. I think that made a huge difference for us, is that we saw kind of purpose in it. Not that it made it easy, but it made it meaningful.
Now, in your own case, how do you feel that experience changed you?
I don't think I was a very good military wife.
Why do you say that?
Because, well, it's a common joke in the Marine Corps that if the Marine Corps wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one.
Oh, right, sure, yeah.
So, and I felt that. I felt like I was not very important in the big scheme of things in the military. So.
Did you have anybody from the military who sort of kept in contact? I mean, did you feel like you were just separate from the whole thing?
I felt very apart from it. We had the strangest situation. I found a mountain of sympathy cards and condolences and calls and messages from all of our friends saying how sorry they were. And when I contacted them, they indicated that they had gotten word that Ron was missing in action.
Really? Wow.
Which was, if I hadn't just been there, would have been very distressing.
Yeah.
But I knew I just left him and he was fine. He wasn't missing. And as near as we could figure, that was part of the psychological warfare. Or maybe it was just an error. But
and so you're still not sure whether that was misinformation
that was intentional or inadvertent
from the enemy,
right,
or a mistake.
But it was just one of those funny, not funny, but weird things.
Did you call anybody to straighten that out, or?
Absolutely.
Okay. You called the Corps and said, I was just with him and he's not missing in action.
Right.
Yeah.
And contacted all of our friends too and assured them that I'd just been with Ron and he was not missing and he was fine. This is a picture of our family after Ron got home from Vietnam. Jody was about a year in that picture, and you can see Randy was on her way. We say Randy is our little made in Japan baby.
Yeah, when Ron had those 2 months during his service overseas,
right.
2 months in Japan. Then,
right. So we were happy to be a family again, and Ron was finishing out his commitment to the Marine Corps. We were living in Santa Ana, I think, at that time.
So in California.
This is taken in Kalimantan in Indonesia, where Ron was an MAF pilot, and I was providing flight following for him. So he would call me when he was in the air and when he was landing at every time he took off and landed, he would check in with me. And it was such a contrast to our military experience, because I was just supposed to keep a peaceful home and send him off with a good breakfast in the morning, and the Marine Corps would take care of the rest of his day. But when we worked with Mission Aviation Fellowship, it was a team effort, and I said I was his flower in the tower, because I knew when he was flying in good weather and bad weather, and So it was a different kind of
Yeah.
involvement and a different kind of reality.
You must have liked that better.
I liked it.
Yes.
I liked it better.
Yeah.
It was not without its anxiety, because I knew if he was going into a difficult airstrip, or if there was bad weather, or a difficult day, a long day for him. So I was
Yeah.
much more aware of his situation in the moment, whereas
Oh.
in the military it was that vague threat that you never knew from day to day what the situation was.
When you compare those two experiences, do you think there's almost an advantage in not knowing what's going on day to day when your husband is in a war zone?
In some ways,
Yeah.
You wouldn't know until later what challenges were
Yeah.
part of his day.
Yeah.
When we worked in Mission Aviation Fellowship, I knew moment to moment what his challenges were.
Has the topic of Vietnam come up more in recent years than, say, it did 20 years ago?
I think you're right in that you have more time for reflection, and you kind of in that period of your life where you're doing a little bit of life review and thinking about where you've been and making meaning of it and finding maybe meaning in retrospect that you didn't stop along the way to analyze
Yeah.
in the busyness of life.
Sure.
But I think he has taken more pride in his involvement and been in more contact with his old buddies, and that kind of feeds that reminiscence. He's gone to
Sure.
the wall
Right.
and
The memorial in D.C.
Uh-huh. and that has been meaningful to him.
Yeah.
And I've participated in some of that.
Yeah. You've been to the wall yourself?
Uh-huh.
What impact did that have on you? I mean, it's a unique memorial. Do you recall what impact it had on you, or did it not have much of an impact? Or
No, I think it was very meaningful to look at those names
Yeah.
and realize that it could have been Ron,
Yeah.
and the blessing that it wasn't, that we were given an opportunity to live our lives together.